Hello, I'm Courtney and I'm here with Dana. We are the Egg Sisters and we are at Gayle's Bernina of Naperville shop and we're gonna talk about some crazy, awesome fabrics.
Yeah, so Courtney and Dana came here to invade the space today just for a playtime. So we have fuzzy fabric, hairy fabric, slippery fabric, and potentially sticky stuff that we're gonna put through all of our different machines. So it's really exciting. It's cold outside, but we've got some fur in here to protect us.
Okay, let's get started. Hey, so let's see what kind of cool stuff we can play with.
So I thought, since most of the stuff you brought is kind of sticky and slippery, I'd start off by kind of showing you that a lot of these fabrics are going to use feet similar to this. Of course, we're using Bernina feet here, but a lot of manufacturers do have different coated feet that will go over sticky stuff. So there's a variety of ones. This one's a pretty big one because it's got like dual feed engaged, and we're going to look at that later. But there's also ones that are for zippers, and then ones that would be for more entry-level machines. And so what kind of material are we talking about? Well, you brought us, honestly, I think this looks like a giant rubber band, but it is indeed material. So these kinds of things is what you would use those for.
Lots of pleather and cosplay.
And then there's also kind of other fun stuff here, like there's a little pile of vinyl here. And with this vinyl, look at this little guy. This is a leather roller. Now, most of us, I wouldn't say I'm a traditional sewist. I do like this stuff too. But traditionally, this would be used for like heavy cording and things like that in upholstery type of work.
Is that what you use for making gloves?
It is.
Cool.
It's called a leather roller because it's for making leather kid gloves.
Nice.
And the idea is that you don't have to really drop the feed dogs, but you can just kind of wiggle things around the little finger seams and things like that. But it also works well for some of the stuff that just doesn't like to feed through. Over here, we've got like this cool like mesh material, and this is a rolled hemmer. Honestly, these have been made since the beginning of time. Old singers used to come with a narrow hemmer foot like this, and what this would be is just doing like a skinny little rolled hem on the edge of something, as well as like maybe a little silkier material like this. I have done a lot of stuff with fur like this. I made a beanbag chair, I've made costumes, I've done all kinds of stuff. And my go-to foot for this is literally like my standard sewing foot or a walking foot or a dual feed foot. Have you heard of that before? So dual feed is where not only do you have feed dogs under the machine, but you also have feed dogs on top. So that would be a walking foot, and that is an external piece that goes off and on the machine.
So it's pulling it through from the top and the bottom?
Yes, but some of our machines have a built-in feed dog on the top. It's called dual feed, and that's what this one's designed to do, and that will really help with the fuzzy fabrics. However, if you don't have that option, I had a fur dilemma once. I made this like little penguin baby snuggle thing, and I actually like you do, and actually I used a foot like this little cup foot,
I put my contact lenses
did
in there.
it free motion.
That's awesome.
So no feed dogs. And then there's also other feet that have little rollers on the end, and honestly this could just do everything we've talked about. So that's
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, we're looking forward to picking some of these out and playing around with some of them.
Absolutely. So I'm here at Bernina 590. Now this machine is a little bit different than what the Egg Sisters are using. They're using the Bernina 435, which is totally awesome, but it doesn't have this little dual feed piece that you see here. So I'm using the foot that is Teflon coated that has the dual feed piece that breaks down here. One of the things when you're using this foot that you want to be mindful of is that you can easily scratch the coating off of the foot. So when you're using this foot, you don't want to sew off of the material. You want to always keep fabric under the foot because you don't want to have the feed dog scratch it on the bottom. So I've got two different kinds of coated spandex here. This first one isn't coated as much as this one. So we're going to start with this, and then we'll move on to this one, and then we have this red material that is a special treat. And sometimes I like to have some additional tools with me, like my little This one's a little bit safer because it's got a little ball on the end. I sometimes helps me encourage the fabric under the needle, or sometimes I need, when I'm getting into some other stuff, I need this little pointy stiletto to help feed because it's easier than sewing through my fingers. So I'm going to just lower the presser foot and start sewing, and this is spandex. So I've elongated my stitch length to about 3 or 3 1/4, and I'm just going to stitch. And this is a tester. Anytime you try a new fabric that you've not used before, do a little test. And now I'm going to just stop. This machine has a little thread cutter. And now we can see our seam. That came out great. So now I didn't really need the treated bottom, the non-stick surface for that, but now see how this is really shiny? This might interfere a little bit with a normal metal foot that will want to stick to this stuff. So if you want to do some top stitching or something like that, you definitely are going to need the non-stick foot. So I'm just going to line this up, and I'm just going to do a little bit of top stitching. And then you can see that nice and smooth. Let's do the same thing with this one, but this one we're just going to hem. So I'm just going to now see this edge, that's a raw edge. You don't have to worry about saving it or wrapping it or doing anything like that because this coated spandex is not going to unravel. And now I'm just going to hem this up about 3/4 of an inch or so. That looks great. All right, what about rubbery stuff? Let's sew some rubbery stuff together. Just line that up there. No problems. Now I'm just going to fold it over. Why don't we do a decorative stitch on this one? I'm just going to do like a little running zigzag. Elongate the stitch a little bit, just to be different. I think it passed.
That's perfect.
All right, I love this luscious gray fur that we're using. This is more than fur, this is hairy mane. So we need to tame this mane. Now there's a couple different ways that you can do this, and this is before you even get to sewing, is you can take your scissors and kind of just trim here in the seam allowance a little bit, just so you don't have all that bulk at the end. You can see here, and this is a messy business, so keep that dust buster nearby or something like that. But this will, kind of help if you have a machine that doesn't like sewing through a lot of thickness. So you can see here, I've just given it like a little cut there. So you can do that on both seam allowances, and just, keep in mind what you want to use for a seam allowance. You might actually be doing 1/2 inch, 5/8 is kind of the industry standard, or whatever, but I'm just, you would just give that a little trim like I'm doing there. If you are going to be a serious mane tamer, you can get, like, believe it or not, a little shaver that you can shave that little seam allowance down. Okay, so we're gonna have that here like this. Now, I also use a walking foot for this application. This machine has dual feed. However, not all of you are gonna have a machine that has dual feed, so therefore, I'm gonna get my walking foot on there. All right, so now that that's on, and you know, we can just pretend that I trimmed that other side, I'm gonna put this together, and I'm gonna use my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to lower my foot here. And you know, I don't think anyone should be afraid of sewing fur because it's really forgiving. It's so hairy, if your stitch looks like crap, you can't see it. It's got all the hair in the way. And then sometimes if you need to like flatten it out, I use like a little stiletto. You can't see the seam, can you? Look at that. Okay, so I've switched feet. Now, you might think that this is a little unorthodox technique for sewing fur, but I can tell you a lot of times if I have to do intricate work, like in this case, I'm making an ear, a good old fluffy ear. And I don't like doing all of the pivoting that's necessary with a foot where the feed dogs are up. So I'm gonna take this button, it's on the side of my machine, and it lowers and raises the feed dogs. And the feed dogs are those little guys right there. And I just dropped them. So now I am the sole responsible person for moving this through this machine, but it's really, really easy. So it doesn't matter what side I start, and I don't have to pivot my ear around. I'm literally gonna move it like, because the needle is like my pen, and my hand is like up here as a big sewing machine. Stitch length doesn't matter. I am using a straight stitch. So I'm just gonna start by lowering the presser foot. There we go. And I drew a line from my pattern piece for these little ears. So I'm gonna start on my little line. And this clear foot is like a cup clip. I'm just gonna cut my little thread. And the reason why I'm using this is it's kind of spreading that fur down so that nothing is gonna invade my needle area here, so I can continue to sew freely. And it's also allowing me to deal with how squishy this stuff is. Now, I can't see through this foot, so I have the opportunity to kind of pivot this around to follow it on my line like this. And I am gonna kind of encourage it here. But I can get a much smoother circle by doing things this way than if I were trying to pivot. All right, so there's my ear. I'm gonna cut. And then I'm gonna just give this a little haircut and I'm gonna turn it inside out. Remember, we need that dust buster handy. Then I take my little tool like this and I'll kind of poke my hairs out here. But you can see. Now, one of the challenges of doing something like this is when I layered them together, I did have to trim it down here, but this, you know, you can kind of clip in and groom it a little bit. I mean, you can't just make an ear and not give it a little groom treatment. So we've got little pretty shimmery kind of thin fabric. This is kind of a, I call this almost a lightweight organza crinkle. It's a poly. It's not like a deer fabric, but you know, if you're doing a costume that would have like a nice flowy skirt under it or just something or whatever, you probably are going to need to hem it because this fabric will unravel. And there's a couple different ways to do it, but I'm here at the machine, and here I have a rolled hem foot. Now this rolled hem foot has a little flute in it, and the flute is going to roll and fold and sew the hem at the same time. So you can see here on the sample that I made that gray thread is our stitching line from our machine. And when you stitch this, you are going to put the fabric wrong side up to stitch, because the stitch is performed with the folded part on the top like this. And then this is the right side of the material. So there's a little bit of a magic trick involved with this. I use my stiletto if I need to, so I keep that handy. But the big to-do with this, and once again, before you do this, you just determine which side you think your right side is. I guess this side is not as shiny, so we'll use this one. I'm going to make a little tail of thread there, and then I'm going to sew just really close to the edge, and I'm going to go in about 7 stitches. Then I'm going to use my reverse button and go back. Lift my needle and my presser foot out of the way, and what I'm going to do is fold this up. I'm just using my fingers and finger pressing and curling this around just to get it started under this foot. So you can see that kind of looks like our hem there. So I'm going to pull my threads under the foot and lower my foot down. And I'm going to sink my needle down into the fabric and do just a couple stitches. And then I'm going to take my extra thread, or I'm going to take my extra fabric and let it feed into this flute where it's going to roll it up for us. And I have to tell you, when you do this, you have to kind of think about sitting at an angle to your machine, and you don't want to do this. You don't want to hyper feed it, but you don't want to let it go out like this too, or it might not grab all the fabric. So you're just going to be patient, and you're going to let your thumb feed that fabric through the rolled hem. And I do want to give you one little trick before you think about using this foot. If I'm going to do a rolled hem on this material, I'll roll hem all my pattern pieces and then I sew it together so I don't have to go over a seam. But there we go. There's our hem. All right, in our intro, we talked about potentially sticky. There's no potential here. The stuff is sticky and icky and ugh. So, but that happens sometimes, you know, when you're making your belt straps or your mandolin straps and things like that. So we're gonna sew this together. This is the right side of our material, and we're gonna sew it together. Now, potentially sticky is, you know, we gotta finesse the machine a little bit more. So there are 2 feet. I've got a 51, and that one is a foot, looks kind of like a regular foot, except it's got little rollers on it. It's like putting a conveyor belt on the top of your fabric. This is a go-to foot for me when just nothing else is going to feed the machine through. Another option for this would be the leather roller. The leather roller is kind of funny because it only has a little wheel on the left side of the needle like this. This one isn't potentially ideal for what I'm doing, but sometimes, you know, if you really have something ooey and gooey, this will work. This is called a leather roller because back in the day when, you know, you had to make debutante gloves, this is the tool that would be used to make gloves because you could still have feed dog assistance, but you can kind of wiggle it around and stuff. And can you imagine, quilters actually use this for echo quilting, and that's kind of a cool function of this as well. Upholsterers will use this to put in thick piping, but because this is kind of sticky, I'm going to try this roller foot right here. All right, so now I'm just going to line these guys up together. The pieces aren't really, here we go, I'll do it this way. So I'm just going to line it up. I'm going to use my 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so I'm going to start here with my 51 foot on the machine using the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance here. And I'm just going to lower my foot, and I'm just going to let those little rollers roll this sticky, icky stuff through the machine. But you know what? It's getting stuck a little, so I'm going to really have to encourage this. So let's lift that needle up, put this through, okay. And I do want to back tack. You know, if I'm doing some kind of holster or something, that area is going to take stress, I'm going to need to reinforce. So here we go. And then I'm going to reverse and cut. It's all about having all the tools together to create the right effect. And so now that's sewn together. And you know, sometimes you might have a lot of thicknesses there where you know, like let's say this is a pocket or some kind of, I don't know what this might be, but you might want to need to kind of stitch something and really get to the edge of something ooey and gooey. And that's where we can take this foot off now. And use this little leather foot. So I want you to see what this leather foot looks like on the machine. And you can see here, I can actually move my needle really close to the edge of this foot. So let's just say I needed to top stitch this down, just like that. All right, so here is a leather roller, and we're going to make mittens for, you know, our little creature. And there's several different ways that you can do this, but what I've done is I have my needle position moved all the way over to the roller as far as I can get, as close as I can get the needle to this roller. And then I'm just going to decide what my seam allowance is going to be. And, you know, really, I just want a skinny one. So we're going to do about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance on this. And then we're just going to stitch. And when I have to do really tight corners is when I'll actually make a really small stitch, because the smaller the stitch, the more you can wiggle things around. And I have to tell you, if you are doing this leather roller, you need to have a little stiletto, because you don't want you to get your fingers near this. But this is going to allow you to really be able to wiggle things around. And if you have to just take 2 stitches at a time to get around a curve, that's what you do. But see how I can really turn that mitten? Now, after I've made several mittens like this, I get better at spinning things around. And this is one of those things when I make the mittens, draw your actual stitching line. It'll be so much easier for you. A mitten.
All right, well, we just finished learning all sorts of things from Gayle here. We tried out a bunch of new materials and feet and got lots of tips, and I learned so much.
It was excellent, and we hope to learn more. And if you guys liked what you saw, you can find us here on YouTube at Egg Sisters. And also make sure to follow
Bernina of Naperville.
Thanks, guys. We hope you learned a lot.